My relationship with Russia are extremely long as my life. I was born there. I lived there until the age of 20. Then I left and grew up in the West, first in Israel, then in England, then in other places. And for a long time, I had very little contact with Russia. Then I came back there between 89 and 91 in the most kind of dramatic time. And in 92, I left it thoroughly disgusted by what I saw. I went away, almost promising never to come again, but I failed this promise and I kept coming. And for the last 3 years, I was there for a very long time, practically. Last 3 years, I practically was there. So this book is not going into very kind of old history. It's going basically dealing with what happened in Russia by such an involved outsider as I am. What happened in Russia during last years, for last, let's say, 10 years, more or less. So that was something that I wanted to see, how slowly a country which was totally subdued by the United States in 1991, so subdued that one thought it would never even rise up from this total position of surrender. Slowly it got up, it stood on its feet, well, maybe not that strongly as it could, maybe not that strongly as we would like, but still something happened. So that is basically a story about what changed in Russia for the last 10 years and how we came to this time. That is very, very kind of good thing that you put it. Indeed, in the very beginning, Putin came to power in Russia as a heir apparent of Yeltsin. Yeltsin was, well, if he was not a Western agent, he was the next best thing to being a Western agent. He was a man who actually surrendered practically everything he could. But his character of himself was so kind of doubtful, so dubious, that he could not really even act properly as an agent, you know. He was too authoritarian for that. But when Putin came, he was considered by many people as, let's say, a new version of Yeltsin, Yeltsin 2.0. Something like that. And indeed, in the very beginning, he acted like, let's say, slightly improved version of Yeltsin. He didn't drink much in the public anyway. He succeeded to stop the Chechen war. But when 9/11 happened, he immediately offered full support of the United States. When he came to power, he was very much dependent on the oligarchs, on Boris Berezovsky among others, and was dependent on the goodwill of West, and the West approved of him because they thought that he is actually a toy in their hands. If he would in 2001 say, I am against whatever you do, well, probably he would be killed same night. So his position was very weak, and it slowly changed. And this slow change went on until the Munich speech, until veto on Zimbabwe and veto on Burma. There is a vision of him by people who are positive to him abroad, that he is some sort of Russian nationalist. He is anything but, not really, no. Again, Russia has practically no tradition of nationalism, of something, let's say, similar to nationalism that you have in the West. Groups that would consider themselves nationalists are very small, very marginal for Russia, not common ones. So this idea of, let's say, local people, of native as opposed to invader, to the immigrant or whatever, this dichotomy is quite foreign to Russians. So they do it, if they're being told by the West to say that they do, but otherwise they don't. Putin feels responsibility for the whole country, which has many ethnic groups, and to begin to say that I am for this or I am for that, that would obviously cause too much trouble and eventually could bring collapse of Russia. That's how the Russians feel themselves. Especially, as I say, they don't really have this tendency. We have now in Russia groups which are in favor of ethnic Russian nationalism. But and it's very interesting that these groups are very pro-Jewish, pro-Zionist, very pro-West. When they say that we want white Russia for Russians only, and we don't want to see any Muslims or any foreigners or anybody else, then you see that they depict basically a story of Moscow Dachi in friendly relations with NATO and Europe, and that's about it. No, it's not all that attractive. Well, not only my appreciation of Putin, but Putin himself changed a lot. He began, as I say, as Yeltsin 2.0, some newer version of Yeltsin, and now he is seen by somebody like almost like a new Stalin coming alive. So, the difference is so vast, and it would be obviously very strange if I wouldn't see the difference and it wouldn't change. It wouldn't kind of change. In the beginning, I was not all that much interested in Colonel Putin, so, there is an ex-colonel that is now occupying a seat of Yeltsin, a seat which has very little importance. Anyway, there are big oligarchs who were called 7 bunkers that were running Russia in those days. So those 7 bunkers give him orders, presumably. That was my feeling. Didn't feel that much about it. Until actually the first call that things are not like that happened in 2003 during American invasion of Iraq, when Putin was strongly against it. And not just against it, he spoke against it. He made then liaison with Jacques Chirac, who was and Schroeder of Germany. So that was actually the great trio of 2003 that spoke so strongly against invasion of Iraq, something that we don't experience now anymore. It seems that was the last time when European nations produced somebody of such stature. Oligarchs had extremely strong positions by the time Putin came into power. It would be even non-realistic to expect he would be able to defeat them all. He succeeded with great effort, and that was the limit of his forces, to get rid of 3 most dusty oligarchs. One of them was Boris Berezovsky. Boris Berezovsky was extremely active oligarch. He was all the time involved in politics. He was the man who was said that he enthroned Putin. That's what he said many times about it himself, and that was basically considered to be true. So to have such a person that thinks that he enthroned you and he is likely to change you anytime he doesn't want, it would be probably anyway too dangerous. So the first thing think Putin succeeded to get rid of him. The second, he succeeded to get rid of Gusinsky. That's another Jewish oligarch who had a lot of media. And this media, he used it as a tool for his political intrigue. He was incredibly active. If he would attack somebody, this attack could, kill anybody, any politician. So to get rid of him, it was also necessary, and so it did. The third was Khodorkovsky. Khodorkovsky was a man who decided to bribe everybody and to become a president. That was kind of a bit straightforward. He was a man that had huge, long string of murders behind him. There is no kind of doubt about it nowadays that he and his organization murdered so many people. I mean, not for fun, I mean for business. They killed people for business. And Khodorkovsky, when he tried to rise up against Putin succeeded to send him to jail. So that's those three. But practically about it, people who were very closely connected to those three oligarchs also ran away, but basically there was no some sort of persecution, should I say. I'll give you an example. A man who was most close to Berezovsky, to the first oligarch, and obviously a very strong enemy of Putin, his right hand was another kind of nice ex-Israeli Jewish journalist named Demyan Kudryavtsev. So Kudryavtsev was back to Moscow very soon, and he was the co-owner of the biggest Russian newspaper, and now he owns few Russian newspapers. And it's not like Putin is doing something about it, not really. So, or for instance, such people as Friedman, who was one of the 7 regional bankers. That's an unbelievable thing. You look at him, this kind of such big fat pig, classical banker pig, and I mean, everything is so ugly about him. It's amazing. He began his career touting tickets near Bolshoi Theater in Moscow, buying them for little money, selling them for a lot of money. And such a man eventually succeeded to become the big billionaire. And you can understand that such people, if they become billionaires, it's by way of killing a lot of people on their way. So he's totally corrupt, totally criminal person. Still one of the richest men in Russia. And nobody thinks kind of doing something to him, even that he gives support to practically every enemy of Putin that emerged in the public. Prokhorov is another important oligarch. Also, whoever is against Putin always gets support from Prokhorov. In other words, it's not only Putin is not fighting every oligarch, and there are too many of them to fight, but he doesn't stop them from going against him either. In short, that's amazing to what extent Putin is liberal. He is so liberal that probably in France he would not tolerate such a behavior of some fat cat that would pay everybody to speak against the president or prime minister, that sort of thing. This is the most amazing question for me to hear. The most amazing, because if you would ask me, I'll tell you it's absolutely opposite. Putin has practically no media of his own, no supportive media. Other way around, almost all media in Russia belongs to oligarchs and attacks Putin day and night. You take any Russian newspaper, with exception of 2, and there are hundreds of newspapers in Russia, hundreds and hundreds, you will find every one of them attacking Putin and his bloody regime. that would be actually a standard thing. The only English language paper, for instance, published in Moscow, which is available to all foreign journalists because everybody gets it for free. You know, it's free paper. You go and get it in every cafe, and it's well-done paper. It belongs nowadays to the same Demyan Kudryavtsev, that is the henchman of Berezovsky, you know, a man who is deadly against Putin. Doesn't matter. He runs this only English language paper. There was another English language paper, but that was so violently against Putin that they could have stopped to pay it money, you know, because they said, I mean, why should we pay for it anyway? There is another one equally anti-Putin, but for free. No, I would say the only newspaper which could be considered, let's say, positive to Putin, that would be probably Izvestia newspaper, maybe Komsomolskaya Pravda, and that's about it. All the rest, all the other hundreds of papers are all against Putin from different positions, but he is far from enjoying, let's say, support of media. Support of ordinary people, yes, unbelievable support. Support of media, no. Imagine what would happen if there would be zero manipulation, zero involvement. And I mean, we speak about something not very realistic, because in reality, we know that there are always forces which act. It's not really that simple. If we would withdraw all Russian forces, then the Western forces will take over completely, and they will be able to promote somebody maybe like Khodorkovsky or something like that. Obviously, if the West would succeed to take over all Russian media and all Russian minds, they would bring somebody like Khodorkovsky to power. And that's probably what they have in mind. Inside Russia, there is absolutely no interest in pro-Western figures. None of pro-Western figures has any influence. I would think that big chance would be that of communists. We don't have now at the moment somebody who could be considered as sort of a communist strongman. The existing leader of communists is not very young man who is considered to be quite soft. Maybe not as soft as Putin, who is considered to be the softest of them all. But anyway, not very hard. There were attempts to find some different personality in Donbass, in this land of fighting forces and fighting men between Ukraine and Russia. So the people thought about Strelkov for a while, but I don't see that out of there such a figure emerged with kind of considerable charisma, with some views. So we don't have today anybody of existing figures who would be able to compete and win in fair elections against Mr. Putin. But again, things still can change. And if we speak not on a personal level, but as forces, in my view, if communists will be led by a stronger personality, younger and stronger personality, they would be able to take the power. Well, you know, in my view, we should now relate to Stalin like French relate to Napoleon. You know, so okay, that's kind of an historical figure. One should take it in a proportion. That was his time. He acted as people did in his time. Well, for instance, look, Winston Churchill. A recognized politician, everybody knows who is Churchill. Nobody kind of thinks too much about the fact that Churchill gassed with poisoned gases population of Iraq, or that he built concentration camps in Palestine, or that he killed millions of people by bombing Dresden and other places, or that he, in 1945, wanted to take all the German troops and attack the erstwhile ally, the Soviet Union. So we kind of not thinking about it. He was a senior politician who did his things in his own time. That was the time. He's not standing trial. The same about Stalin, in my view, in my personal view. So, that was a man who did what he did in those days. They were very hard days. And, he does not stand trial. So, let's kind of, historians speak about his place, but not more than that. But that's my attitude. Now, Stalin became an extremely important figure for last few years. First, or let's say we can take it even back. In 1956, the campaign against Stalin that was started by Khrushchev, the then party leader, that was actually the most important single reason for demise of the Soviet Union. It took time, but it actually undermined the Soviet mind, Soviet faith, Soviet belief in their own forces. It broke between Soviet Union and its friends in the West. It was actually a catastrophe, not less than that. In 1990, when Gorbachev began his great change, perestroika in Russia of those days, he also was terribly anti-Stalin. All his media, and he controlled media to such an extent you can't even imagine, nobody can imagine. He had full control of all media of those days. All of it was anti-Stalin. They would always say about the great tyrant in Kremlin who would get up and drink a glass of baby's blood and whatnot, such, practically, almost, not exactly. And that was their way. After that, when everything that Russians owned was privatized and stolen by a few fat cats, these fat cats, when they would be told, well, why do you steal it? They will say, would you better prefer Stalin? For a while. And people began to answer, yes, we would. So in a way, Stalin became a banner of people who are unhappy with the oligarch rule. And so it is now. If you see a Russian who says something positive about Stalin, you may be sure that he is against the oligarchs. If he says something negative about Stalin, it's 99% that he is for the bankers, for the oligarchs. So I don't want to say that whether Stalin was good or bad, but that's how his name became used now. And it would be obviously very strange of me now not to take it into account. I would, let's say, would support if the name of Stalin would be returned to the city of Stalingrad. There is a metro station in Paris, but in Russia the name of Stalingrad was erased by Khrushchev, So it would be a good thing to return it. It would be a good thing to normalize it, so people would know that Stalin was a great leader of his own time, with all the problems, all the faults. Nobody is perfect. Well, obviously things changed. He began to change things, and that is really very good. In the days of Dmitry Medvedev, who is now prime minister and then he was president, Russia made few very, let's say, unpleasant slips. One of them, first of all, is Libya. That is something that everybody remembers in Russia, and whenever they say Medvedev, they say Libya. that was the decision of President Medvedev then not to veto the proposal of the Libyan proposal. I can't myself blame him all that much. I followed these events, though I wasn't much in Russia those days, but I still followed it pretty closely. It was difficult to blame because the proposal itself didn't speak of any military action against Libya. They spoke only about protecting civilians. And, protecting civilians, it sounds kind of fine, Then there was incredible loud cry in all Western media saying Gaddafi bombs and strikes from airplanes his own civilian population. So the Russians listen to it, they say, well, maybe not 100% true, but even 50% is too much, so why not to protect population? And they didn't understand that for the West, for the United States, and for French, too. French were very much involved in it. Let's kind of, not overlook it. For them, actually, everything they needed is some agreement with something. And instead of protecting civilian population, then began bombing of everything. And killed hundreds, thousands of people in Libya. We don't know how many. And Gaddafi was murdered in the most vile way. So whatever happened in Libya made huge impact on Russian minds. And that is something that really changed things. One would say, why they did not change their mind in 1999 during Yugoslavian campaign. Yes, surely they did, even then. Yugoslavian campaign was also extremely painful for Russians. They really didn't like it. They saw that what they say, nobody listens to them. They could, speak to answering machine or something with the same effect. So it was really not much of anything. But here, Libya was much later. And by the time of Libya, Russia had already muscle and money, and it could stand up, let's say, by itself. And in such position, to give up Libya was considered to be a big mistake. Especially that there were contracts, there was money that Libyans owned Russia. But on the other hand, President Gaddafi, leader Gaddafi, whatever, he was not a very pro-Russian figure. He didn't go much to Russia. He promised to buy things, to buy Russian anti-aircraft missiles, but he never paid for them, never got a delivery. He was much more interested in friendship with the United States and France until last moment, basically. And then it was a bit too difficult to change. So it's difficult for me to blame President Medvedev for not doing much for him. But after that, obviously, Syria was the first thing. That was really a great achievement to stop. When it was similar outcry, President Bashar Assad kills every Syrian. It was so similar what we heard before. Serbs kill everybody, or then who was that? Or Hutu kills everybody. Basically, I never believe those stories of somebody killing everybody. I think it's always bullshit, and it's always done and always in order to make us believe what they say. I myself formed this opinion even in Cambodia, where I was in the days of Pol Pot. I don't believe all the horrors of Pol Pot. I don't believe all the horrors of Cambodia. You name all kind of a mass killing, you wouldn't find me supporting, this story. Russia has now a lot of challenges. One of them is Ukraine. The problem with Ukraine still goes on. Putin was very keen to avoid getting involved in Ukraine. He did not want Ukraine. He had different things on his mind, tried to avoid it. It was forced on him, and it probably wouldn't go away for a long time. So Ukraine is the first thing. Second thing, let's say, as similar to Ukraine but slightly kind of different, that is the question of Donbass, which should decide sooner or later by itself whether it will go with Ukraine, whether it will stay alone, because Russia of Putin doesn't want to take him. Maybe, there will be different forces in Russia which will decide differently. I told you before, and I can say again, that Putin is considered to be a very, very soft Russian in his foreign policy, extremely soft. I can't believe that anybody who would come after him, if he would come by popular vote, would be half as soft as him. Probably, if you would listen to public voice, to the Vox Populi, Russian tanks would be in Kiev a long time ago. And if that would be not enough, Russian tanks would be in Warsaw. And if that wouldn't be enough, they can come to La Manche. So, there is no problem about that. Many people in Russia feel very tired of being spoken in such tone as Russia is being spoken to by the United States, by President Hollande, and by other people who do not respect Russia sufficiently for the Russian views. And while President Putin is, as I say, basically a very soft politician who wants to manage his country, to improve level of life, let's say life expectancy, to make people live better, and in friendship with the West, I can't believe that such person again would come to the seat of power in Moscow. I think Putin is probably in the last chance of Western Europe to have such a friendly personality in Kremlin. So that, let's say, would be my expectation, that things, whatever will change, it will change. Another challenge we see now, Greece, is also very important thing, what happens in Greece. Greece, has the same faith as Russia. Greece for Russians is like, let's say, Rome for the French Catholics. So it's very, very important thing, and there is a lot of emotional connection to Greece. People would like to help Greece. And if Greece would ask for help from Russia, they will get it. And again, probably President Putin would be one of those who would try to give less help than somebody else, because he feels more responsible for his country. But the next ruler of Russia probably will be able to help Greece in much more, let's say, efficient way, and not only by money or by food, but perhaps by weapons too, So that is second thing. And then there are challenges practically everywhere. There is an ongoing challenge of American doctrine of first nuclear strike. That many Americans believe that they can make a first nuclear strike, which would be the last one. And obviously that is something that bothers Russians. They develop new and new nuclear weapons in order to make sure that if it will happen, the United States will be annihilated as well, even after Russia would not exist. Such devices exist from Soviet days, and they're being kind of, let's say, better developed now. And another challenge is the challenge of the European Union. Russia also wanted very much to be friends with the European Union, but it doesn't seem to work. So probably, let's say, Russia would have to prefer to see European Union dismantled, to deal instead of it with separate European countries, because the EU became a machine, let's say, a harness for American control of the continent. If countries would be separate again and free and independent, maybe it will change different situation. So that's probably most important things. There is a question of American indebtedness. America owes trillions of dollars to all the world. These things should be solved. They owe much more than Greece. And it's something that should bother all of us. There is a question of which way science will go, which way religion will go, because Russia is much more religious than France is today. And that is also a very important thing, how it will proceed in light of such changes as we see in the United States. So there is a lot of changes, a lot of challenges. President Putin is probably the man who can cope with them in his most soft, patient, and basically moderate way. It doesn't mean that this moderate way is the best way to answer the challenges.